Okay, hi everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I see we still have a few more people joining, but we're going to get started here. So this is a meeting where we'll be talking about the community air monitoring results. So thanks for joining us today. I just wanted to go through a few rules as we discuss before we go over to the presentation. So we will be taking comments throughout the presentation. You can enter them in the chat box, which you'll see the button for that at the bottom right of your screen. And you can type in questions there, and we'll get to those towards the end when we're doing a Q&A. If there is anyone from the media on and you have specific questions, we won't be answering those here, but we will coordinate with you through our press office after the event. So stay tuned for that. And I guess with no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Adriana Espinosa to get started. And I just want to let everyone know also that for more information, I'm going to be putting in the link to our air monitoring webpage in the chat right now. So you can always click on that, but there is also a QR code up on the screen. So Adriana.
Thank you, Andrea. Appreciate that. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Adriana Espinosa. Use she, her pronouns, and I am the Deputy Commissioner for Equity and Justice at the Department of Environmental Conservation. I'm really excited to be with you all today. I'm happy to see a lot of familiar names in the participant list for those who've been engaged with us for our 50+ meetings we've had so far on this initiative. But this one is the most exciting so far because today we're going to discuss the overall findings of the statewide community air monitoring initiative phase 1 report, which we released earlier this week. And the report, which features story maps and mapping tools to help us and the communities and New Yorkers all over the state understand the results, evaluate sources, and develop emission reduction strategies. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is an agenda that we have for the event today. I wanted to use this moment to also provide a huge shout out to my colleagues for the culmination of about 2 years of work that got us to today. A huge shout out to our Deputy Commissioner for Climate, Air, and Energy, John Binder, who's joining us, and our technical team at the Division of Air Resources, led by Margaret Lafar, and the Office of Environmental Justice, led by Alana Cadell-Tuckey, who is helping to advise on building out a just and equitable process for the statewide community air monitoring initiative. So without further ado, let's dive in. Next slide. Okay, so first, a backdrop here for the Community Air Monitoring Initiative. This is required under the state's Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, or Climate Act for short, and it requires us to monitor air quality in 4 disadvantaged communities. Back 2 years ago, Governor Hochul expanded that to 10 communities to provide a more comprehensive look at air burdens in disadvantaged communities. Mobile monitoring was conducted for 1 year in each community using vehicles that are equipped with sensor technology that measures and tracks greenhouse gases and other air pollutants, which we'll get into a little bit more. And the results of this effort are going to be used to inform investments to reduce emissions and exposure to air pollution in disadvantaged communities. And you can see here on this map, but we'll get into a little bit more, the 10 communities, the 10 study areas that were released results for earlier this year. Okay, next slide. Okay, so just to get a little bit more into the purpose of the air monitoring initiative, as required by the Climate Act, DEC will identify high air pollution burdens and the local sources that are contributing to air pollution. Particularly, we're focusing on locations that are near sensitive populations like schools, senior housing, child care facility, things like that. And our work next will be to work with the communities to gather input on air quality priorities and priority areas to help develop emission reduction strategies that are community-centered and based on lived experiences of New Yorkers who live in the study areas and other areas around the state that are burdened with air pollution. So we also will assess existing measures and responsible entities to reduce emissions and implement exposure reduction strategies. So that's all going to be in the next exciting phase of this work, and we can get a little bit more into the nuts and bolts of how that's going to look like, but I want to make sure we've got time to get into what did we release earlier this week and what do those results look like. And for that, I'm going to turn it over to Margaret Lafar. Margaret?
Thanks, Adriana, and good afternoon, everyone. You can go to the next slide. Thanks. The mobile monitoring provides short-term sensor measurements for many pollutants over a large area. Sensors are not regulatory monitors, and these results represent a local screening level of sensor data to show higher and lower air pollution levels across a community to help identify sources. Next slide. So low emission vehicles were driven on public roads at least 20 times across all days of the week and times for 1 year. Again, this was to identify sources contributing to elevated concentrations, and staff evaluated the mobile monitoring results, other air monitoring results, including DEC network and community studies, emissions information from permitted sources, and community input. The map on the right is an example of one of the maps our contractor Aclima prepared, showing annual pollutant levels for the Bronx. In the Bronx, the study area boundary covers 63% of the Bronx, which includes a high number of air pollution sources, including traffic, which is a known major source of air pollution, disproportionately impacting the area. The pollutant measured here is fine particulate matter, which is particulate matter measuring less than 2.5 microns and smaller. And the yellow road segments show higher levels measured along major expressways like the Cross Bronx Expressway. Next slide. So this slide shows the target pollutants and expected sources of pollution, including greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and methane. PM2.5 mostly comes from combustion sources using petroleum-based fossil fuels to heat buildings, generate electricity, and run motor vehicles. Other sources include industrial processes, commercial cooking, and burning wood. Methane is measured to identify releases from landfills and sewage treatment. Ethane is measured with methane to identify natural gas leaks. Next slide. So just want to clarify the use of these monitoring results a little. Mobile monitoring is primarily measures traffic pollution because it is collecting data in the road as the car drives. But it does potentially capture pollutants from nearby sources, and it is beneficial to this project because many people living in DACs live closer to roads and air pollution sources. Mobile monitoring uses sensors, so they are low cost, portable, and require calibration and correction. Their performance can be affected by temperature, humidity, and other pollutants. EPA recommends the best use of results from sensors as non-regulatory supplemental information. Sensor data should not be compared to health-based air quality standards and cannot be used to evaluate an individual's health risk. EPA has not defined health-based standards for very short time periods, such as those being measured by sensors. More research is needed to understand the health effects associated with short-term peak concentration and how health risks should be communicated. Next slide. So DEC efforts to provide the communities with exploratory maps and tools helps us expand the conversation about air quality and work collaboratively with communities to get their input about air quality concerns and validate some of the findings. Next slide. Aclima modeled annual average pollutant levels for every 100 meters of road across the study areas. DEC incorporated these results into their online interactive maps along with other data visualizations showing higher pollutant levels using the 1-second data to identify sources. The CAM science team has developed various methods to identify areas of higher pollutant concentrations. The image on the right is an example of the mapping tools found in the story maps. It shows areas of higher pollutant levels or focus spots. And this one is for nitrogen dioxide and black carbon. I'm sorry, nitrogen dioxide and black carbon are indicators of traffic pollution, typically diesel vehicles. These are near sensitive receptors, which are locations of vulnerable populations for exposure to air pollution, like schools, childcare facilities, public housing, nursing homes, and mobile and stationary sources. DEC is providing these tools to provide more context to help communities identify sources and develop air pollution reduction strategies. Next slide. So overall findings. For one, the findings validate some of the community's concerns that we heard during the community meetings. The community air monitoring results are consistent with other studies that have shown that mobile monitoring with sensors are useful screening tools to provide insights about local sources and pollution levels across a community. In general, higher pollution levels were found along and near roads with high traffic, congestion, bus and diesel truck traffic, construction, busy commercial retail activity, and near industrial zones, waste transfer stations, rail yards, scrap metal processors, vehicle dismantlers, auto body repair shops, asphalt plants, ports, petroleum storage, warehouses, and landfills. Diesel vehicles operating in and traveling to these areas are contributing to these higher pollution levels. Next slide. So here we have a few high-level summaries illustrating different examples. In the story maps, I am sorry. So in the story map or from our webpage, you can look on your own device if you want to follow along, explore them on your, oops, I am on the wrong slide, sorry. Each story map has examples of specific results for each community. Many of the roadways, important source categories, and neighborhoods of interest have been identified. And next slide. So the next steps, staff will be developing community reports in 2 phases. Both phases will be presented as online interactive story maps. Starting in September, DEC will hold in-person meetings to discuss the results using the story maps during the information sessions and presentations. Then the most critical work begins. That's working with the communities to identify and prioritize areas of concern and sources for emission reduction strategies. We'll work with other state agencies, city and local governments, and other relevant stakeholders to be a part of this process and work across intersecting issues. DEC doesn't regulate all sources likely to be identified by this effort, and some problems, like land use, will require solutions beyond the scope of community air monitoring. This fall and winter, the community advisory committees that have been set up will meet to prioritize their air quality concerns and develop air pollution reduction goals. These committees will come together as one group to collaborate with DEC, the Climate Justice Working Group, and other entities to work on possible strategies to meet emission reduction goals. DEC's second phase of reporting will include the prioritized recommendations to mitigate air pollution and the entities with authority to implement actions. The expected release date is 2025. This report may also include areas for follow-up activities, such as additional monitoring, facility inspections, and regulatory or permitting actions. And now let's get into the story maps. And I'd like to introduce one of our science team members, Dr. Joe Marto. Joe, you want to take the next slide and then get into the story maps?
Sure thing. Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you.
Yeah, so today I have the pleasure of walking you through DEC's first online report to the communities, which is a collective of interactive digital story maps. Feel free to scan the QR code found on this page to access the story maps from your own device if you want to follow along, explore them at your own leisure, etc. So just as background though, a story map is a digital story that integrates maps, text, and multimedia to inform and engage the user in an interactive environment to explore the data. We're trying to learn from past community air monitoring studies where we produce reports with a lot of material and they were time consuming to read, for most people not easy to understand. Our one-page summaries of the results and fact sheets had wider audience appeal. So providing this online platform for people to explore the mobile monitoring data is a more effective way to communicate these results. The story maps provide high-level summaries of the results, and then the mapping tools allow you to identify locations with higher pollutant concentrations, nearby sensitive receptors, and assist in identifying possible sources contributing to higher pollution levels. So as I said, these are compatible across a whole bunch of devices, and now I'm going to take control of this screen and we can dive right in. All right, so before we dive in though, I'm going to start on the Community Air Monitoring Initiative page, which is a page that was shown in the chat before. Because I do want to highlight a couple of things on here. First of all, we've made a couple of videos to go along with this project, including under this What's New tab, one that's a kind of walkthrough tutorial of the story maps themselves. So if you want to, get a see our way of going through the story maps and how to explore them, that's a really great way to do them. You can also see this link right here to the Phase 1 community story maps that can be found. But if you scroll down a little bit further, I do want to highlight that, as we said, we are going to be having in-person community meetings. So a bunch of these have been scheduled already in different locations across communities, and you can find them here. Likewise, us DEC scientists, we want to be available for people if you have any questions. So in the next couple of days, by early next week, we are going to be posting virtual office hours here. So if you are exploring the story maps and have questions that you think are more thorough, more in depth, or if you want some assistance, navigating through them and whatnot, we're going to be available virtually, for those virtual office hours. But so if we dive into the story maps right here, this page brings you to the story map overview. This is kind of the outline page, which shows all of the different story maps that we've made. We have some background information about the project itself over here on the left, and then our collection of 15 story maps here, which start off with an overview of the entire project, a whole bunch of great background information in there. There are 10 story maps, one for each of the communities. Then we have 4 story maps about the 4 different methods that we used here: peaks analysis, the development of focus spots, our mobile source indicator tool, and ACLIMA's annual pollutant levels, the modeled output. And then we also have this community air monitoring mapping tool, which allows you to explore all of our data layers at your leisure with full power. So I'm going to go through that at the very end of this presentation here. If we dive into the overview, what we see is, first of all, on the left here, you can see the last date that we updated these pages. So these are a little bit alive. Sometimes there's information that we want to add or things that we're going to want to change. So you can see that we last published it then. We have a whole bunch of jump links here that go to different sections of this story map. So what is mobile monitoring? Introduction to the study. What is mobile monitoring? How to use these story maps, using sensor data, overall findings, and next steps. And if you click on any of these, it's just going to jump you up or down the page. We give an introduction to the study itself, talk about community input, different sources. We talk about what are our community profiles. Then we discuss what is mobile monitoring. So mobile monitoring is pretty complex. There are a lot of caveats to using mobile data and the sensors that are used here. We created a video if you want to go through it that way, or we have additional information there. Then how to use these story maps. The same video as on the main page as a tutorial can be found here. But we also are, providing kind of different ways that we want to guide the user through the experience. So there's a lot of information here, and we don't expect that people are going to just read it all like a book. You're going to jump around, get interested in something, want clarification on something. And this how to use the story map section is a really great tool to kind of work as your framework, work as a guide for how to explore this. Sensor data is complex and it's not the same as regulatory instruments. So there are some caveats to working with the data. So we wanted to be clear about what are some of the things, what are some of the considerations that we have scientists have when we're looking at this data. Then we present some overall findings, which are some things that we have found all across the communities, across our study areas. And lastly, next steps. So we have talked quite a bit about the fact that, just the fact that we published this part 1 report doesn't mean that this project is over. We're going to be holding in-person meetings. We want people to engage with the tools that we've made and provide us feedback as well. And, work collaboratively with the communities to start to implement some emission and exposure reduction strategies. So those are all parts of the next steps. I'm going to jump back to the project page, and now I'm going to jump into one of the story maps. So why don't we go into Manhattan? All 10 of the communities get their own story map, which have a similar outline to each other. So they have a community profile, which provides a background about the community and kind of the state of the air quality in that community. What is the industry that is in that area? How did we get to where we are right now? We discuss historical redlining, which is a historical practice that the federal government implemented in the 1930s and 40s, got outlawed in 1968, but we're still feeling repercussions from redlining in the past. So we talk about that and how that is still felt in these communities to this day. Talk about some air pollution sources, mobile air monitoring results, and then our community survey and next steps. So I'm really quickly going to dive through here. We have a whole bunch of, images and videos in each one of these story maps to keep them interesting. A lot of historical imagery as well as modern and contemporary images as well. Historical redlining is the first place where we have one of our maps. So if we give that a second to load, we can see that all of these maps are interactive. So you can, pan, zoom, and scroll. We have the legend over this on the side here. And if you're familiar with, a whole bunch of different a whole bunch of different mapping software, it should be relatively straightforward to navigate through these. In the air pollution sources section, we talk about some of the known sources, some of the mobile sources, and then we also talk about different community studies that have been involved in these communities, specifically ones that have DEC grants. And then we get into monitoring results. So as we've alluded to, we used a bunch of different methods to analyze this data. I'm not going to talk about the specifics of those methods today, but if you're interested in learning about them, we have the different story maps linked to here, which talk about them. And then you're going to see what some of those results look like. So to display some of the results, what we decided to do was this kind of a map tour, which just shows kind of a highlight reel of some of the examples that we found in the communities. It's not exhaustive. It's just an example for some of the things that we look at when we're looking within the maps that we've developed. So for example, here we have a description of some of the pollutants that we're seeing. We have different toggles, so you can change what the map is showing. Here we're now showing our non-diesel indicator. We're going to change that around to show sensitive receptors instead, as you see the maps and the legend updates. And all of this is also interactive. So here we're showing some of our focus spots. You can click on a focus spot and you can actually get more information there. So we're showing, in this situation, what is a pollutant that's being shown, what is the median and the units, and then a little description down here that's showing this is a 29% elevation of black carbon above typical values in the study area. So there's very powerful tools here for you to explore and see some of the examples. And then if we go through, it's going to jump around a bit and show different examples in different parts of the communities. So we have outlined these for all of our communities, just again, as examples of some of the results that we're finding. If I scroll back up a little bit, we also link in this area to the community air monitoring mapping tool. And sorry, the lights just went off there. And I'll show that in just a minute, but that will allow you to play around with all of the layers and explore everything as you see fit. And then at the bottom of this section, we have a community survey. So as I said, we don't want this to be just a one-way process. We want to solicit feedback from the communities about concerns that may or may not have been captured by this study. So we have created a survey that's going to be open until 2024. And if you click on it, this will allow you to go through and, say different things that you've experienced in your community within the study area. So I should note this is not meant to report emergencies. If there's something life-threatening or incredibly extreme, you should either call 911 or your local DEC office for that. Instead, this is supposed to be, I think, to show some of the sources that you might find of concern in your community. And this is going to be available to use until December 31st, 2024. We're going to use these results as part of our part 2 report. And then we also have an outline for next steps moving forward as well. So then the last thing that I want to show you all today is the community air monitoring mapping tool that I alluded to. If we click on that, and I'm actually going to switch to a different tab to just make this, make this a tiny bit larger. So this tool allows for exploration of all of the data layers across all 10 communities. These little tabs at the top here are pretty important. So the About one gives a lot of information. So we talked about what this tool is and where you can find stuff about this tool. I really want to highlight the layers here. There are a whole bunch of layers that you've been seeing, and when you play around with them, they might be a little bit more confusing. So there is a whole bunch of information in here about what does a permitted sources layer mean, what is a peaks layer, etc. And this is also where we have links to the data sources that we got this information from, if they're not made in-house. We also link all of the fact sheets that have been made for this study within this About button. So that's there. How to use this tool. This is a quick little tutorial that you can go through and see how to use the maps, but I'm just going to show you live. And to do that, why don't we jump into one of the communities? So I'm going to start with Buffalo, Tonawanda, Niagara Falls. If you ever get lost, this I button in the top right brings you right back to that About pop-up that we had in the beginning. So if you want to learn more about the layers, for example, that's a great way to find it. But just to orient yourself really quickly, all of the communities work the same here. They're a map that just shows the study area to begin with. There are a whole bunch of different tabs on the left here that are interactive, and then you start off with the layers. So the only layer that is on to start off with is the CAM study area. What we can do is we can start to play around. So maybe when we want to put on historic redlining, maybe we want to put on sensitive receptors. And if we start to zoom in, we can actually, play around with these layers. There's a whole bunch of functionality within here. So for example, you can reorder the layers if you want. You can increase or decrease their transparency. If we turn on sensitive receptors, permitted sources, and let's say peaks, you see that these maps get very, very busy. So these layers specifically have filters that we can apply. So for example, for sensitive receptors, maybe we just want to look at libraries and schools. For sources, let's just say automotive manufacturing vehicle repair, for example. And that has cleaned up the map quite a bit. For peaks, maybe let's say we want to look at ethane and methane because maybe we're interested in seeing where there might be natural gas leaks. And very quickly, let's say we can see that something's going on in this location. Just like with the maps within the story maps, all of these layers are interactive. So here we see that there is a methane and an ethane peak. I'm going to press this button to move this over to the right. And we can get information about the methane peak that's found here. One of my favorite functions here is to see, first of all, what days the peaks were identified. And then second of all, we can go into the Google Street View. And this is an example that I've gone back to multiple times because if we move the Google Street View, right here we can see that there's this gas infrastructure, gas pipeline. That's probably where the leak was happening. So that's a really, really quick example for a way that you can look at some of this data and start to do your own exploration. As I mentioned, all of this is interactive, so you can see who the permitted source is, you can see what the sensitive receptor is. And if you, want to reset your filters, we can then press this button right here and it's going to reset them all. We might go back home as well. So I'm going to go back to the layers and just show a couple of these. So as I said, focus spots is one that I've used this term multiple times. focus spots is a very specific definition, and basically they are areas where we have statistically significant elevated concentrations above the study area median for that pollutant. So right now we're looking at PM 2.5, and you can see that there are a whole bunch of different focus spots that have, different characteristics right next to each other. So these are some of the areas that we recommend you start looking at when you're thinking about, okay, where are places that we want to make intervention strategies to try to find emission reductions. Or you might pair this with your sensitive receptors, for example, and say, okay, well, maybe in this focus spot, there aren't any sensitive receptors. So is that as much of a priority as ones that are very close to schools and playgrounds, for example? Just some of the things that we're thinking about when we're looking through these layers. The annual pollutant levels, this is the annual modeled concentration. So one thing that I should have noted previously is that if we put on different layers here, this tab over on the side is the legend, and this will live update to whichever layers are active right now. So we can see our focus spots both above and below a threshold that is defined, within the story map for the focus spots. And then we can see what are the concentrations for the different colors for your annual pollutant levels for PM 2.5 in this case. With the annual pollutant levels, again, a lot of interactivity is happening here. So this is done on every single road segment within the study areas. And we have contextual information about how strong is an elevation compared to the typical values there. For PM 2.5 and nitrogen dioxide, we do compare it to the EPA annual standard. With the caveat being that this is not regulatory data. This is a modeled concentration based on sensor concentrations. So it's not a one-to-one. It's just kind of giving you an idea of where you might expect to see higher concentrations for this pollutant. And so we can see that even though this is, some of the areas where we have high PM 2.5, it's still lower than the EPA standard. For the annual concentrations, by default, it's just the PM 2.5. If we open up this layer group, we can change around and we can start to look at, what are the annual concentrations for the other pollutants as well. I'm going to then go through and very quickly, we have our diesel mobile source signature and our non-diesel mobile sources, and these are made up of 2 layers. So the lines as shown here are the annual average daily traffic for diesel or all vehicles for the non-diesel numbers that are modeled from the Department of Transportation. And then we have this index indicator tool, which is giving you an idea of what is the likelihood of impacts from this group of pollutants. And again, information about all of these layers can be found within the documentation for the story maps. So I'm going to pass it back to Adriana to talk a little bit more about community involvement and some of our next steps, but we're going to be around for questions at the end as well. So take it away.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Marto. That was so great and so exciting to go through that. I see we have lots of questions in the chat, so I'm going to try to get through some of this, the rest of the presentation. That way we can get to as many questions as possible in the time we have. Let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so just going to hit a little bit here on some community engagement. So an effective community emissions reduction program must have community engagement at its foundation. And so community input is a central component of the mitigation strategy development that we're kicking off now to drive solutions that'll be most responsive to community needs, priorities, and lived experiences. We also recognize that some of the problems that may be identified through the air monitoring will demand solutions beyond the scope of community air monitoring and even beyond the scope of DEC's jurisdiction. And so that's why we are developing a comprehensive approach with input from partners across the state to develop the mitigation strategies. And that includes engagement with across different agencies at the state level, the local and municipal level, because that's what's needed in order to successfully help improve air quality in disadvantaged communities. And, under the Climate Act, it is required that all state agencies reduce greenhouse gas emissions and co-pollutants in disadvantaged communities. So just to get a little bit more into what we're planning for, so we have a series of proposals for community engagement. One, to support engagement throughout this process, DEC's Office of Environmental Justice will be putting together another round of capacity building and community air monitoring grants. This follows 2 rounds that have happened previously while we were in the study phase. We also have the community advisory committees that were set up during the study phase that we mentioned earlier. We want to support community involvement in order to identify concerns and develop the emissions reduction strategies. And so the agency will continue to support those committees and work with them to provide education, input, in order to understand the data and support them in developing priorities for action. And then we're really going to focus on state agency collaboration. We're going to form an interagency working group to develop and implement the strategies. And that's all part of the overall picture for community engagement. And I will go on to the next slide, please. All right, so local air monitoring results and community input can help inform investments in disadvantaged communities to reduce air pollution, especially in areas near sensitive receptor locations. And by that, I mean vulnerable populations like children, our elders, people with pre-existing health conditions, people with disabilities, and those who may be more susceptible to the effects of poor air pollution, poor air quality. People living in disadvantaged communities face intersecting issues. That's an important part that DEC recognizes of this program. And those intersecting issues are the result of economic, health, social, and environmental burdens. And the state, therefore, has to take a comprehensive approach to address these intersecting issues. For example, air pollution, health, housing, and energy concerns in order to meet New Yorkers' needs more effectively. And so we're committed to developing a process for the mitigation strategy that really recognizes and speaks to those intersecting needs. And next slide, please. Okay, I think with that, we're going to open up and try to get to as many questions as possible. And where should we start, Margaret?
I was just looking at the list. So I think some of those we answered in the slide deck, or in the chat. Will the slides be available later? Yes, we'll post the recorded webinar on our website, and we will also share the slide deck. How were selections made for the communities in the study? Adriana, you want to start with this, and then Marilyn, if we need more details, you can jump in.
Sure. So at a really high level, the boundaries for the study area was developed in consultation with our Division of Air Resources, the Climate Justice Working Group, and community input. So the Climate Act requires that this effort be undertaken in what's termed disadvantaged communities. That's a term under the state's climate law. And DEC selected disadvantaged communities that would receive air monitoring based on 12 specific environmental burden indicators that are most associated with air pollution. And so the air team developed an air pollution burden score to generate areas with the highest air pollution burden. And then that information was presented in each community and those boundaries were then firmed up with community input based off of essentially, okay, here's what our data suggests are the areas with the highest air pollution burden, and then we work to ground truth that through community input on the ground. Anything major that I missed there, Marilyn?
No, I think you covered it very well. It's just if people have a specific question about what those actual environmental burden indicators are, just generally they represent potential pollution exposures, for example, traffic, and their proximity indicators. So proximity to diesel trucks and buses, and overall vehicle density. And we also had some modeled results for PM 2.5 and benzene that were incorporated. And then there's a list of other proximity indicators that generally represented by land use and facilities associated with historical discrimination or disinvestment, such as major oil storage, active landfills, power generation, municipal waste combustors, scrap metal processors, vehicle dismantlers, and also we included industrial manufacturing land use zoning.
Okay. So the next question, will the in-person sessions be available as a recorded version? So they will be in person only, but we will have office hours and questions can be submitted to our email box, clcpa.cam@dec.ny.gov. So I think that's it. Next question after that one. Have you been in contact with the New York City Department of Health? They do community air surveys as well, but not at this micro level. Pretty amazing. Thanks. So yes, we have been working with the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. We agree that the results from New York City's community air survey are a very useful tool. And we've also met with other local municipalities about the program. All right. Is the community survey only for people or groups located in your 10 investigated communities? So we're using that survey tool to help us with the next steps of the initiative, which is developing emission and exposure reduction strategies. The tool will help us learn more about community concerns in the study areas. And our intent is to focus on the study areas, but we do welcome input from others outside the study area. Please use our email, again, that's clcpa.cam@dec.ny.gov. So this next one, I think I'm gonna turn over to Joe. Were gas utilities notified of those leak data sources? I understand that there was to be a notification effort in place.
And we can say that yes, local utilities were notified. We have a fact sheet that explains the follow-up activities that were conducted and explains how we use the results to determine if a leak was present. So just a little bit with that, ACLIMA did have infrastructure in place to identify specifically really large gas leaks and report this to the utilities. And then they also had some independent reporting of smaller leaks with local utilities that they had their own contracts with as well. So yeah.
All right, Joe, this next one's going to be on this too, or Marilyn. So just to clarify, you put on a layer, let's say PM 2.5. Will we see all levels or just the focus spots? All focus spots are elevated levels?
Yeah. So you will see all of the layers that are checked on the left-hand layer list at a time. So with that, the different layers have a little bit of a different meaning. So focus spots represent areas where the pollutant levels were statistically significantly elevated and spatially clustered. So there's a threshold that we looked at to look at levels above which and below, above and below the study area median to identify areas that have a stronger evidence of higher pollution levels. So that's for the focus spots. For the other tools that we have, for example, for the annual pollutant concentration levels, the road segments, that was done across the board. So the focus spots are just areas of elevation, whereas the annual pollutant levels shows for everywhere in the study area. Same thing for the diesel indicator tool and the non-diesel indicator tools. Those were done across the board. So if it's in the study area, there's going to be a result. Versus focus spots are just elevated levels specifically.
Okay. The next one is going to be Adriana's to answer. When do you expect the deadline for the next round of capacity building grants?
Sure, great question. So that has not been announced yet. Me mentioning that on this call is our first time mentioning that it's coming because I really wanted New Yorkers to have a heads up that the opportunity will be coming. We're expecting to release the grant opportunity later this fall, and typically our grants have a lead time of over a month, sometimes multiple months. But if you have input, happy to hear that. But that has not hit the streets yet. Thanks.
Okay. So have you shared this information with the New York DOT? Yes, DEC has shared the results with our agency partners, and we welcome continuing input from DOT and other state agencies as we transition into the critical mitigation phase of this initiative. So this next question is quite long, and I have a feeling we're going to have to follow up afterwards. I'll read the question, but I do think we're going to have to follow up on this one. What if sensitive receptors aren't captured in the maps? Previously funded DEC air monitoring projects aren't included in this list. Lastly, in the section for North Brooklyn, all the photos are other communities. Can those be updated to reflect Greenpoint and Williamsburg? So I think the office hours might be a good place to follow up. Again, we're going to have those office hours posted on our website soon. If
Yeah,
that's not an option, right, you can email us, or we can talk to you at the public meeting in Brooklyn.
I'll really quickly just add in two things. First of all, for the sensitive receptors and the sources, those layers are actually statewide, and they display outside the study area as well. But for sensitive receptors, those, we've cited the sources for all of them, and we're trying to be as complete as possible, but even all the databases online are not going to be perfect. So, we've done our best, but if there's anything that you know of that was not captured, definitely shoot us an email and that would be appreciated. And then for images, we've cited every single image, every single video that we've used within these projects. And so if there's, specific areas that you want to see and you have photography that you'd want to add, we're definitely amenable to that if you have stuff that, you're willing to share. So thank you.
Okay, thanks for that, Joe. Next one, how much will be invested in Hempstead regarding this air monitoring study? Adriana, do you want to take this one?
Sure, happy to take that one. So right now where we are in the process is we've just released phase 1 report. And that is publishing the results of the 1 year of community air monitoring. So that's where we are in the process. And the next phase will be to develop statewide mitigation strategy, and that includes what investments are needed. So that will come future down in this process.
Okay, I'm gonna skip one and go to the one after that, Adriana, because I know you have to leave soon. Can you tell us more about the composition of the community advisory committees?
Sure thing. Well, we tried really hard to develop community advisory committees in each of the study areas, recognizing that there are different priorities, lived experiences, needs, and interests that are diverse across the 10 study areas that we have. And so our approach was really to identify a local leader, a local partner on the ground who can help us engage directly with the stakeholders who live in that study area. And that ranges across the state. In some parts of the state, in the city, for example, we've partnered with several of the borough presidents, the city of Rochester, for example, and environmental community-based organizations in other parts of the state. And the goal really for that is to work with them to identify the interested stakeholders who would want to engage with the state on this. And we've been meeting with them for over the last year as the study has been going on, and we hope to grow that work even more in phase 2. So we are open to anyone and everyone who wants to roll up their sleeves and work with us in any capacity that they can to help advise on community priorities for the air monitoring effort. And really our approach here is because we recognize that we don't want just DEC to set the menu for what happens next as a result of this program. And so having these committees is really designed to help share power and input across the entire state with how we move forward.
Okay, thanks. How is the Covanta incinerator factored into this air monitoring process? I'm going to ask that questions about really specific areas, I think, are best handled during our office hours that will start next week. Again, if you can't make the office hours, feel free to send us an email, clcpa.cim@dec.ny.gov. And I think we put that in the chat as well. And let's see, could you please elaborate about the vehicles used regarding their emissions and if it is adding to the vehicular pollution? Marilyn? All right.
Yeah, sorry for the delay.
That's okay.
Yes, they used hybrid Prius vehicles, so they were low emission vehicles for the monitoring.
All right. Thank you. Will the DEC be available for more community discussions, sessions, and to help us with using the tool? And yes, again, those office hours are starting next week, and we will post the details on our initiative website tomorrow. And you can use the QR code to get to the to our website. Okay, so let's see, next one. What patterns did you document along the BQE in Brooklyn? This is incredibly informative. Have lots of follow-up questions and looking forward to the office hours. Marilyn or Joe, do you want to talk about this? You've looked at the data more than I have.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot that's happening along the BQE. We saw multiple locations with higher pollutant levels, and specifically near the Williamsburg Bridge. I do have to say that, yeah, as Margaret said earlier, we're trying to avoid talking about real nitty-gritty specifics right now, but we do talk about a little bit of that within the Brooklyn Story Map, if you want to check that out. And then, of course, explore the data, email us, come to the office hours, come to our community meetings, and we'll talk a lot more about that coming forward.
Okay. Have you drawn any conclusions around the magnitude of various sources? In other words, which types of sources were the largest inputs to particular pollution levels? And again, I'm going to throw this to Joe or Marilyn.
Right. So one of the things that we saw was that traffic is a dominant and primary contributor to pollution monitored in this initiative. And part of the reason for that is that, this was mobile monitoring. So it's measuring on the roads. Of course, it's going to see a lot of pollution on the roads that's coming from vehicles. But beyond that, we are trying really hard to identify some of those stationary sources as well, and some of the other areas that have elevated pollution. So if you, again, go into the story maps themselves, we do talk a little bit about that. So, yeah.
Okay, thanks. The next couple of questions are related to the grant opportunities that are going to be happening. Adriana had to drop off the webinar, so Katrina, we will get back to you on that at some point, okay? Sorry about that. Is there a feature on geographic overlap with asthma rates or pulmonary disorders? And let's see, Marilyn or Randy?
So we did not include contextual data for health outcomes. It is included, however, within the DAC criteria that were used to develop the air pollution burden score and to select the areas. So we feel that health vulnerability, health sensitivities were incorporated in selecting these areas. And we're focused on developing the emission reduction strategies. So our analysis really focused on the emissions and the identification of the sources, along with considering the sensitive receptors.
Okay. How are the mitigation efforts going to be reflected in the state budget, and what commitment has the governor's office promised in regard to mitigating the expressways? As we said earlier, we've just released phase one, which is on publishing the results of the air monitoring, and the next phase is where we're going to develop those mitigation strategies, including the investments needed. Let's see. How was any air data collected for Niagara County outside the city of Niagara Falls, such as the EJ areas at the Tuscarawas Nation and city of Lockport, the town of Porter, DAC? And Marilyn, I think you can answer this one best. But I also know we did talk about this during the meetings before monitoring as well.
I'm sorry, Margaret, could you please
Fine.
repeat the question? I was
Absolutely.
answering another question. Chat.
Sure. Was any air data collected for Niagara County outside the city of Niagara Falls, such as the EJ areas at the Tuscarora Nation and city of Lockport, the town of Porter, DAC?
No, that area was not selected for the community air monitoring, although all Indigenous nations are included as disadvantaged communities. We did evaluate that area, and we selected the areas based on the air pollution burden score, and that was not an area that was within the higher burdens.
Okay. Let's see. I don't know if we have an answer right away on this next one. How accurate are the data readings while the car is in motion?
I can
Joe?
tackle that one a little bit. Yeah. So there are a lot of caveats when you're using sensors and when you're trying to get a really fast response with them. So part of that is that, any noise that's happening in the instrument is going to be kind of amplified if you're trying to measure, every single second for a whole bunch of pollutants. So our analysis tries to account for that. One of the biggest things that we did for developing our focus spots for our peaks and for our diesel and non-diesel indicator layers is specifically try to isolate data that are really, really elevated to, say that we have higher confidence that this concentration is really elevated. So with our tools, we're a little bit more concerned about, oh, there's a really strong elevation, and a little bit less concerned, is that a 5 or is it a 7, that we're seeing there. So that's just one of the ways that we tried to skirt around the data quality issues that we have going in there. But I should also note that there were data quality metrics that were part of this process as a whole. And so one of our fact sheets goes through, what were the data quality metrics and how well did the sensors do at actually meeting those. So read more about that if that's what you're interested in.
Okay, Joe, I think I've got another one that I skipped that you might be able to answer. How were diurnal patterns that impact pollution levels accounted for in the data and analysis?
Yeah, again, a really interesting study, a really interesting question, because a lot of these pollutants, yeah, they do vary day to night. So with that, there are a couple ways to think about this. First of all, the Aclima vehicles, they were driving basically 365, 24 hours a day. So we have data from, middle of the night, across the 4 seasons, early morning, rush hour, during the work week, on the weekends, all of that. And internally, we've looked a lot at this. We didn't summarize these results in any specific way to show in these story maps right now. But that doesn't mean that it's not important. So for the annual pollutant concentrations, for example, with the model, they are accounting for the hour of the day in terms of um, how the data is scaled and how that actually propagates through to their annual pollutant concentration. For our peaks, for example, we show the time of day that the maximum concentration was found. So it is something that we've really thought about quite a bit, but it's not as much part of this layer here. And honestly, if you want to reach out during like any of our office hours, we have a whole bunch of different graphs and figures and stats that we have calculated internally that are looking at trying to answer some of those exact questions that just aren't at the exact same level that we put out with this data that we're presenting right here. So I hope that's adequate.
Thanks, Joe. Let's see. Will the RIA health layer added to the dashboard to showcase the disproportionate health impacts, specifically around respiratory illnesses? And Marilyn.
So, as I said before, we felt that the health vulnerabilities and health sensitivities were included within the DAC criteria, and our focus of this initiative is to identify sources and come up with emission reduction strategies. So we will not be providing those layers. However, you can look at the New York State disadvantaged community criteria website. We'll put that in the chat, and it does have helpful maps that you can zoom into the census tracts and look at that data. I know Joe will agree with me. We tried to keep our maps as straightforward and clean as possible. We also felt that by adding any other layers, it would take away from our objective, which is really to identify the sources.
Okay, Marilyn, you're on for the next one too.
Okay.
Can we obtain the Niagara County data DEC review to assess burden outside Niagara Falls, which received the designation?
Yes, I did answer in the chat. I'd be more than happy to provide you with all the data, how that air pollution burden score was calculated for the Niagara Falls area, and also how it compared to the area that you're inquiring about. Lockport, you said, and the Tuscarora Nation. So I see your emails in the chat, and I will follow up right after this meeting as soon as possible. Thank you for your question.
Thanks, Marilyn. And I think we're just going to take a couple more because we need to put an end to this webinar, I think, for today. But I will go with Katrina's question and then one other. I'm not sure why this didn't come out in the community engagement in Rochester. The story map says no concerns, but I hear a lot of concerns from our partners about one, our rail yard, and two, the airport, and expect folks will be really interested to hear about relevant comments when you visit. Both involve big diurnal variables. The airport in the wee hours, engine startup, and the rail yard has much higher black carbon with switching activity at night. And so, Katrina, we do apologize that we didn't capture some of those concerns, but we do want to continue to hear concerns from the community members. We'll add those specific concerns you mentioned to the story map, and if there is anything else, they could also add it to the survey tool. All right. Next one is, other than the methane ethane ratio as a marker for natural gas, were there any other parameters that could identify sources of pollution? Joe or Marilyn, you're both ready, so either one of you.
Yeah, I would say a lot of the peaks are going to occur really close to the source because they're really, really high concentrations. And specifically when I think about PM 2.5 and black carbon, a lot of times really high concentrations of those are happening really close to where they're going to be emitted and not as much further away. So it's really difficult to do source identification from mobile monitoring data. That's just really true across the board. And methane and ethane, it's oftentimes much clearer because you know you can kind of see, make an assumption if that's natural gas or not, and then identify the source. But this is something that we're continuously trying to do and continuously trying to identify, which is looking at the data, looking at high concentrations of the pollutants that we consider primary pollutants, the ones that are coming directly from their source, and see if we can actually identify that. So to answer your question, I mean, yes, kind of. We're trying. It's definitely one of the things that we're interested in exploring and collaborating with the communities to see better ways to do about that.
Joe,
Marilyn,
I'd
did I miss
also
anything?
like to
Yeah,
add
yeah.
too, we have our mobile source indicator tools. So by
Yes.
looking at diesel and non-diesel, so for diesel vehicle emissions, we looked at black carbon and nitrogen dioxide indicators of diesel. And then for non-diesel, regular passenger cars, vehicles using gasoline, we combined the pollutants and looked at PM 2.5 or fine particulate matter, CO and CO2. So that tool is very helpful in looking at the differences between diesel and non-diesel. So that's another way that we're trying to identify the different sources.
Okay. I think we got most of the questions. If we didn't get to yours, I apologize. We will try and follow up with you, or you can also send us an email or join one of our office hours. And I just, Andrea, can you put the slide with the dates for the in-person community meetings? Did we have that?
Yes.
Okay.
I think it was. It may not have been on the slide. It just may have been in the
Oh.
web page that
That's
we
where it
linked
is.
to.
Yeah. So if you use this QR code, or go to our um, uh, Community Air Monitoring Initiative webpage, all the meeting dates are listed there. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for attending. We welcome your questions and hope to see you at our in-person meetings.